understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How are you doing there? It is time for the podcast. And John, before we go into today's podcast, which is actually going to be all about the Basque people in northern Spain, their economy, their history. Beautiful. I am here. I'll tell you all about that in a second. But what about Cyril Ramaphosa? We were saying the last time out, there may be a Zelensky moment. Not only was there a Zelensky moment, there was a sort of a home video produced.
Yes, and reams of case studies that were, I would say, fake, most of it. But it was interesting when Pumi was saying that, he's the consummate professional and politician and he'll stay calm. He certainly did that, but he didn't push, in my view, he didn't push back enough with Trump. But who knows what happened behind the scenes?
Just so you know, dear listener, if you don't know what John and I are talking about because you mightn't have listened to the last podcast, we're talking about...
Well, why didn't they listen to the last podcast?
Well, exactly. We're talking about the relationship, the meeting between Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa and Donald Trump. We were framing that last week as a significant meeting simply because South Africa has a number of options, one of which is to jump into the Russian camp, Chinese camp, the other camps, not necessarily the American camp. And the fear was, when I was down in South Africa, that there would be a Zelensky moment, and I think there was. Or there was an effort on the part of the Americans.
Well, it was another ambush without facts. The usual shite.
Usual stuff. Anyway. The other thing that we spoke about in the last podcast, John, was the fragility of the bond market, the fragility of the debt market, the perception that the United States is not the bet it used to be. Now, we will talk about this maybe in the coming pod when I get more details of the big, beautiful budget that is now actually scaring the bejesus out of financial market players. So much so that people are thinking this could well be a tipping point for American finance. Over the last 10 or 15 years in America, there has been this one-way bet that America is the tech capital of the world. It is dynamic. It is a corporate leviathan. And basically, all you should do is put your money in America, walk away. Now, that is not necessarily the central case anymore. We could talk about that.
But that could be another taco moment, would it be?
It could be another taco moment, but the problem is that...
As in Trump always chickens out.
Trump always chickens out is our expression. We will come back to this, but I want to talk about something for me is much more interesting than Donald Trump, actually. Much more interesting than the American long bond. It is the place I find myself today, John, which is one of the most unique, possibly obscure, certainly misunderstood, and I think possibly the most, how would you describe it? It's not just fascinating, it's a sort of a slightly spellbinding place, which is the Basque country of northern Spain and, of course, southwestern France. There's 4 Basque provinces in Spain. There's 3 Basque provinces in France. I saw graffiti yesterday on the wall, 4 + 3 = 1. This is obviously from the Basque nationalists. And they're basically saying, we are one country.
Actually, hang on.
Kadeshin.
That is what you're talking about. That's myself and Aljo and Mark in front of that graffiti.
The 4 + 3 = 1.
Yeah, back in 2016 when we went there for the rugby final.
So John went for the rugby final. I went for the Europa League final. I had already bought the tickets before I knew who was in the final. We went with our old mate Murphy. And it was Manchester United, of course, and Tottenham Hotspur.
How was it?
And, well, I can tell you, the self-described, as they call themselves, Yid Army. I know it's not particularly kosher, but that's what they call themselves. They were in full voice. In fact, I was very impressed by the Spurs fans. They outsang and out-piss-taked the United fans all the way through.
Really?
They were in very good voice. Now, in fairness, they got a jammy goal. I mean, the funniest thing about this, the occasion was great.
Yeah.
There were loads of Mancs, loads of
It's a great stadium
Londoners.
as well.
Stadium is great. It's tight. It's compact. It's the home of Atletico Bilbao, which we'll talk about in a second. But the game for the neutral was
Yeah.
kind of comical because they're two very bad teams, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But what was really nice about them is neither of these teams can defend. So it was really open, right? Because you know that no matter what happens, if anyone gets the ball and runs at this defense, either the Spurs or the Man U defense, they'll just completely collapse.
Yeah.
And they did. So it was
Yeah.
an open game.
And it was getting feisty as well.
Getting very, very feisty. We were in the neutral end, so we were kind of equidistant between the United fans and the Spurs fans.
You weren't in the neutral end. You were in the West Upper.
Well, we were. We were in the Murphy. We were in the UEFA seats. Yes, we were exactly. We were in the West Upper, or the UEFA version of the West Upper. It was a total and utter hoot. You know, did Spurs deserve to win in the end? I don't really know. I mean, but the interesting thing was, I thought that the United fans didn't really get behind their team.
Really?
You know, even the first time, there wasn't a huge amount of noise coming out of the United end. And when I say the United end, it was half the stadium.
Yeah.
I
suppose this is after being kicked around the place all year in the Premier League that they've, you know.
The poor old Spurs were kicked around as well. But anyway, the point is, Spurs, you know, God bless them, they so rarely win anything. You got to think. And I met some guy afterwards, and they're talking about, going back to 1984, the last time they won anything in Europe, all that sort of stuff. So that was that. But fascinating, John, it was in the stadium of Atletico Bilbao. Now, Atletico Bilbao are a team that came fourth in the Spanish league, number one. They qualified for the Champions League, number two. This is huge, right? This is worth about 100 million euros to a team to qualify.
Really, that
Champions
much?
League, with all the various different, with the TV rights, with all the various different marketing push that'll give you. You've got, I think it's you've got 8 or 6 home games, which will be full, all that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
They're a team that are not allowed to play any player who's not a Basque.
Yes, right? I
Right?
did hear that before. Why is that?
Now, that is why we should talk about this race, the Basques, right?
Yeah.
So can you imagine a top flight football team, rugby team, whatever it happens to be, that does not play players from outside, not only their country, they don't play people from outside the region. So if you're a Catalan or a Castilian, or you're from wherever else in Spain, you can't play. Portugal, you can't play for them. And with that team of local lads, they have qualified for think about this, they've qualified for the Champions League. They come fourth in the Spanish league, behind the Reals and the Barças, the Athletic Madrid of this world. And I want to talk about the Basque people, because I'm here and I am fascinated by their history, their economics, their politics, how they've remained isolated. The first thing is to establish that this is a race of Europeans that doesn't seem to have any link with the rest of us. Now, that is the fascinating thing.
How do you mean?
Their language. So all or most European languages are called Indo-European languages. So they're the function of after the Ice Age, when you get this mass migration out of Anatolia, because it's Indo-European, those people originally came from India. And then you get 2 or 3 incarnations. That one goes north, and that's what they call the Magyar and Hungarian and Finnish roots of languages. The others come west, and they gradually evolve into the languages we know, the Slavic languages, the Italian, the Latin languages, the Germans, etc., all of which have grammatical indentations of each other, suggesting that the original speakers came from 1, 2, or maybe 3 tribes, okay, and managed to separate from each other as they moved through Anatolia and up into Europe after the end of the Ice Age.
Yeah.
Except this one. Except the Basque language. The Basque language has no links.
And why is that?
So the thing is, I think mind-blowing idea is, it is thought that the Basque language could you imagine, from the pre-Ice Age.
Yes, yeah.
Now, think about this, that these people are actually directly descendant from the very first European settlers. These people may well be descended from hunter-gatherers who became domesticated on their own in Europe, without any influence from the Sumerian tradition or the Anatolian tradition. At that, in and of itself, I find really, really
But
mind-blowing.
all of northern Spain and the Basque country is a real hotbed of ancient civilizations with cave paintings and all that kind of stuff. So that was quite a populated area back in the Ice Age or directly
You're
after the Ice
absolutely
Age.
right. You're absolutely right. So between the Atlantic and the Ebro River in Spain, south of the Pyrenees, we've discovered a huge Paleolithic civilization that existed before the Neolithic age, which is basically your kind of post-Ice Age, right? Number one. Number two, you put cave paintings. Every other civilization that has cave paintings has kind of bears and humans hunting elephants, things. Do you know what the Basques have? A sea bream. A picture of a fish. Exactly. And I want to come back to this as well. Right? So they were celebrating fish before anybody else. But let's go back to this idea, right? So language is evidence of history because language is the trace that our ancestors left us before they wrote anything down. So if a language deviates from all the languages around it, what you're looking at is a civilization that was genetically cut off from Europe or the rest of Europe for a long, long time. Because what you will find is the language will change as you get occupied, as you absorb, as you assimilate, as you marry, as you compromise. So if the language doesn't change for many thousands of years, as this language seems not to have changed, and there's no direct link with any of the languages around them, it means that the people who spoke this language were completely and utterly independent of the Indo-European migrations that characterized the rest of Europeans. Now, that is fascinating.
And the Basque written language is also unusual. I mean, they use all the letters that no one else wants to use. Loads of
the X's and the Y's. Yeah, exactly. So that's the first thing that you find, okay, now that's an interesting thing, right? Because we know, like Celts, we migrated 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years ago, whenever it happened to be. We know that we might have been the last of them. We pushed out of Europe, all that stuff, right? But we understand where the Irish came from, or we have a story that makes sense. And of course, as well as archaeological evidence, it's linguistic evidence that binds us to the rest of Europe, right? Now, these guys don't have that. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is when DNA testing came in. So there was always perceived like this is a language from somewhere bizarre. When DNA testing came in the 1960s, 70s, and of course it's much more evolved now, the genetic map of the Basques is totally different to the genetic map of most Spaniards and people of the Iberian Peninsula now. So the thought is that they were the original first farmer settlers and maybe even, as I said before, descendant from hunter-gatherers who settled independently in this part of the world. We're talking thousands and thousands of years ago. So again, that is a fascinating thing, that the DNA evidence of these people and the linguistic legacy left by these people and their forefathers suggests a society that was completely isolated or was completely terrifying for others, so much so that nobody came near them, right? And then you think of the geography, and you know the geography because you've walked around here. It's incredibly hilly. It's very, very difficult terrain to get around. You've got all sorts of their own mountains. Very rainy, cold for Spanish. For Spaniards, it's cold. And then if you look at, the Romans came, they knew of the existence of the Basques, but they never went near them. It was like those fellas up there in the hills. The Visigoths, after the Romans came, they knew of the existence of the Basques, they never came near them. Your mate Charlemagne and all those things came, they never went near them. It was only much, much later with the Ferdinand and Isabella and that sort of expansion of Catholic Spain that the Basques were, at least came under the rule of the rest of the Spaniards. So the first thing is, when you're here, you're looking at the people and you're saying, wow, this is a different story to the rest of the continent. And I love the enduring legacy of that is the fact that they won't play foreign footballers in their football team, right?
That's amazing. And to get to
Right?
the Champions League, it's incredible.
It is. Then an interesting thing, they also call themselves, so Escura is the language, and Escuran is the people.
Mm.
And the people are the people who speak Basque. That's what they say, right? And it's from talking to them here, they tell me it's a language of many, many dialects, at least 7 or 8 dialects. And it wasn't only standardized until the 1960s. And that kind of, again, makes sense. It's a bit like in Swiss and Swiss German. Some Swiss cantons have been so isolated from other ones that they don't understand each other. And the same thing went for Irish years ago. There was a thing in Irish called Caidan New na Gaeilge, which was the standardization of Irish, which
Right.
got people from Donegal and
Yeah.
Cork and Galway and all that. It was just trying to standardize the language so that you could teach it in a standard form in
Yeah.
school. And this was all kind of done academically and done, intellectually and all that sort of stuff. I know it didn't really work for many of us.
Yeah, I have to say, which makes me laugh, is that my old aunt Eileen, who you
Yes.
knew from Kerry, was an Irish speaker, and she was always giving out about the Donegal version of Irish. It wasn't the right version at all.
Exactly. Oh, but by the way, on Donegal, I got a couple of emails from Donegal people recently who've said we're down on Donegal. So we're not down in Donegal. They're taking it the wrong way. We're not down in Donegal.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Shout out to Donegal. But let's go back to our friend the Basques, who are also a remote people on the northern area of the country. Then looking at their history and their economics began to fascinate me. And I bought this book, I think I told you about it, The Basque History of the World by Mark Kurlansky. Now, Mark Kurlansky is an American writer that I have met. I tried to get him to come to Dalkey. He is a brilliant, brilliant, funny man. I met him in New York. He wrote another book called Cod, which was basically seeing the world through the eyes of a cod, right? And how the cod has changed, right? Sort of shit I like, John.
That sounds great.
Exactly.
Fisheye lens.
Exactly. His fisheye lens. And part of his fascination with cod comes from his fascination, John, with the Basques, because you go down the street here and we know that the Bay of Biscay is not particularly cold. It's not particularly warm. It's not particularly cold.
Yeah.
And it is not the home of the cod.
Yeah.
The cod's home is our neck of the woods, Norway, Iceland, and Canada in particular.
Yeah, they're much colder fish.
Colder fish, right? You walk down here and you like your pinchos, okay? You like your pinchos.
Sure do.
And the national dish is bacalao.
Yeah.
So the national dish is salted cod. So you think, hold on a second. How can a possibly Paleolithic people who were drawing pictures of the sea bream, which is native to the Bay of Biscay, have ended up having cod as their national dish? What were they doing? And what they were doing is they were fishing thousands of miles from home. This is why many Basques say they discovered America, right? Not the Spaniards.
Another one claims that.
Exactly. So
I thought it was St. Brendan myself.
It was St. Brendan. It was Eric the Red. It was the Vikings. Now the Basques have laid claim to it. And what the Basques say is there is a reason why cod is their national dish. It is because they were the very first ones to discover the Grand Banks in Canada. And they salted the fish and they brought it home. Now, your man John Cabot, the fella, originally French fella, but apparently the Brits say he was from Bristol, who did discover that, or who's alleged to have discovered that, did say that he was aware of the Basques in the area in the 16th century.
Wow.
Right?
I mean, that's a hell of a trip, isn't it?
It's a hell of a trip, but they were definitely there. They were definitely there, right? And the second thing is, if you ever talk to fishermen, like real fishermen, like fellas who go out in trawlers, and if you talk to a fisherman, they find a really, really fruitful place to fish, they'll never tell you.
Yes, of course, yeah.
Right? They're not going to come home to the pub and say, we found this place. It's their little
secret fishing hole.
So the question is, did the Basque fishermen, who were extremely adroit at the oceans, did they find the Grand Banks? And is that the reason that cod is their national dish? Because it's alien to them. That's the first thing. But the second thing is then lots of Irish people believe that we're very closely linked to the Basques And that, again, that sort of trading route of north-south, straight up, it does make complete sense.
It's when you get the boat from Cork to Bilbao, or used to be Santander, it's just a straight run down. It's downhill all the way.
It's downhill all the way, exactly. That's why going uphill could have been a problem, you know. We might have got to them, they mightn't have come to us, right? But so I am interested in the Basque history of the world, but I'm also interested in the role of the economy in everything. Because if they were hunter-gatherers, right, there is an assumption that the hunter-gatherers are kind of walking around aimlessly with no sense of resources or no sense of economy. I don't think that makes sense. I think the hunter-gatherers must have been people who had a sense of the economy in their head. And if you think that was the way the Basques might have started, which was they started not as sort of migrant farmers like the rest of us, but as rather resource-aware, energy-efficient hunter-gatherers, right?
Yeah.
And so then you think about, why were they they're so good at economics here?
In what way? How do you mean that?
So the Basques were the only Spaniards people in this part of the world that experienced an industrial revolution.
Oh.
So in the 19th century, so they were doing their cod, hanging out in Cabot, feeding the world, because they were exporting cod to all sorts of places, because they were actually salting the cod, they could export it, all that sort of stuff. We know that they were exporting a huge amount of oil because they were expert whale killers in the Bay of Biscay.
Oh, okay.
And they killed the whales not just for the meat, but also for the oil. And they got very rich on these trades. We know that, as well as agriculture and making wine and making all that sort of stuff, cider, all the stuff they make, right? But they were the only part of the Iberian Peninsula that had an industrial revolution.
Yeah.
The Catalans had a commercial revolution, but the Basque people found iron ore here in huge quantities. So they became the steel producers of Spain in the 19th century. And as a result of being steel producers, they became the only manufacturing part of Spain. They became the biggest makers of ships, of steel ships, and of weapons in Spain.
Right.
So they became an extremely, even though they were within the context of the Spanish king, they became an extremely rich economic trading nation. And they were the only part of Spain that actually began to look and feel like Northern Europe. And Bilbao, of course, was their big city. So much so, they looked so much like Northern. Their connections with the Brits are very interesting. You know their flag?
Yeah.
It's the Union Jack with green in it.
Yeah.
Right? It was based on the Union Jack.
A red background and then green and white,
Green and white, but the flag structure is based on the Union Jack.
Yeah.
Also, Atletico Bilbao were set up by Englishmen.
Oh, okay.
As Englishmen set up Inter Milan too. There you go. Mad, stupid facts we have, right? Inter Milan were originally a cricket team. There's another strange thing. They're in the Champions League final this week.
Mac's brain is sparking in all directions now.
Anyway, where are we? What I'm going to go back to is what you have is a race apart here in this part of Spain. And as a result of having the Industrial Revolution fed Basque nationalism. Basque nationalism starts to emerge in the late 19th century, based around the language and culture, but mainly the language. And Basque nationalism becomes the force of the 20th century. Bilbao is the center of everything, right?
Yeah.
And Bilbao's port was the center of everything, John. Okay?
Yes. Well, I was reading recently that Bilbao port in the 1900s was the biggest port in Spain by a long chalk.
That makes complete sense because they were actually the only part of Spain that was exporting industrial manufacturing goods to the rest of the world. And they were very closely connected to the UK. Very, very closely connected to the UK. Now, fascinatingly, John, and we're going to come on to this, the port of Bilbao was in the center of the city up until the 1980s. And we're going to talk about how they moved the port and how we should do something similar in Dublin.
Yeah.
And what they did in the port is a fascinating story as well. And it kind of changed the complexion of modern day Basque country and modern day Bilbao.
Well, let's talk about that after a bit of this. Bilbao, for me, Mac, I have a real soft spot for, because I've been there many times, both walking and actually at the Bilbao Music Festival, the BBK, which is just brilliant. But the one thing smack in the center of Bilbao, where it used to be the port that you're just talking about, is the Guggenheim Museum, which is fantastic.
Well, let's talk about the Guggenheim Museum, because the Guggenheim Museum marks a transformation, not just in the urban fabric of Bilbao, but it also marks a transformation between the old Bilbao and the new Bilbao. So
Yeah.
Bilbao was a bit like a northern English town in the 1970s and 80s.
Yeah.
It was producing steel, it was producing ships, it was producing weaponry, kind of hard industry. And of course, what happened in those places is competition mainly from Asia.
Mm.
China begins to open, North Korea begins to open. And what you see is that shipbuilding, heavy industry, manufacturing all moves to Asia gradually.
Yeah.
So if you forget that the Spaniards were out of the EU until the mid 80s. So the Spanish market was largely a uncompetitive, captured market where Franco's kind of fascism demanded that certain companies bought from other companies, and it was a very stagnant economy. But if you were the people who produced ships, well, then other parts of Spain bought those ships from you.
Yeah.
They then begin to join the European Union. That opens them first to competition from France and Germany and Italy. And of course, that chips away at Bilbao's position. And then later on in the early 90s, it's the China-Korea effect, all of which condemns a place like this, like a lot of cities in the north of England, to becoming one of those, another one, as they say in Europe, those post-industrial societies.
Mm.
So what did these people do to adapt to that and reverse their fortunes? And that's where the Guggenheim comes in.
Right.
So the
Okay.
Guggenheim Museum was supposed to go to Vienna, but the Viennese decided they didn't have the space for it, and Bilbao pitched for it.
Yeah.
And what they did was they took the old port that was now decaying in the center of the city, and they moved it out to closer to the Atlantic. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's at the end. It's in the city, but it's about 15 kilometers out.
Yeah.
Towards the Atlantic. What did they do to where the port was? They said, okay, let us redevelop it, so much so that we make a statement about the new Bilbao. And the statement was through the Guggenheim Museum. And they got Frank Gehry, the original architect, Canadian guy,
Mm.
to come and do it.
He's
It
the
is
guy who does all the curvy buildings.
it's all the curvy buildings. It's
Yeah.
all the curvy buildings. And it's a monumental piece of architecture right in the center
Yeah.
of the city, which signals lots of things. But the main one is we are a culture hub. If you want culture, if you want tourism, if you want high-end services, you come here. And the evidence of that is that we have this Guggenheim Museum right in the center. And it has changed the complete dynamic
Yeah.
of the city completely. And I mean, you've gone there, you've seen what it's
Yeah.
like, you know how it's sort of, in a way, it is what Bilbao is now.
Yeah. I mean, it's this whole idea of investing in culture where it actually gave people a reason to come there, tourists to come to Bilbao, but also a reason for people to stay.
Exactly.
Bilbaoians, if that's what you call them, to stay in Bilbao. And of course, it brought in lots of tourism, and therefore there was more jobs and blah, blah, blah. And also then helped Atletico Bilbao keep the
Yeah.
people there, to
Yeah,
keep the
but again, I
players.
come back. What I like about Bilbao is the two biggest cultural centers in the center of the city are the Guggenheim Museum and the football stadium. I
Yeah.
quite like that high and low art, middle brow all the way. That's me, Mr. Middlebrow. But coming away, John, I mean, I know we're on a little bit of a trip around the world and we will be going to some other small cities over the course of the next
Yeah,
2 or
looking
3
forward
weeks.
to it.
So we're going to have all sorts of little updates from small cities, the economies of small cities all around the world. But to come back, the Basques were crushed by Franco. They had ETA, their version of the IRA, which led them up a garden path. It took them a long time to wean themselves off that. Guernica was the moment where Basque resistance was also crushed in the Second World War. Picasso, of course, embodied that in that most famous piece of modern art.
Yeah.
And by the 1980s, you wouldn't have bet on the Basques. You really wouldn't have. But they turned it around, I think, because of a love of the city. And this is where I want to end. We talked about dereliction in Ireland last week. We talked about the people who run the city of Dublin not giving a sugar about the urban environment. There is no, I can tell you, I've walked around the city.
Yeah.
There is no dereliction here. There is no urban vandalism. What there is the opposite. There's a celebration of the urban life of the city.
Yeah.
There's a celebration of the history of the city. There's a sort of ballsy chutzpah about the future of the city. And it all comes down to mindset. They have the mindset right. I'm afeared that in many cities in our part of the world, we don't have the mindset right. But if you could imagine changing Dublin Port, I know I've come back to it loads of times, but I'm going to come back to it again. Shifting the port, taking that piece of land, which is 10 times the size of Stephen's Green, and creating a new city, and maybe plonking a Guggenheim right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And saying, that's the type of people we are, and that's the future. I think that's kind of worth going for.
That's pinchos for thought there.
Oh, I'll talk to you on Thursday.